Hey, good morning, everyone. So I wanted to give you a quick update on this bass synth that I've been building. I've done a lot of streams recently on Twitch about this and a couple of them on Facebook and a few other places. But the time's come to start demonstrating some of the features of this bass synthesizer that I've been building, and also take a listen to how it sounds. I am really pretty happy with how it's come together right now. The stage I'm at right now is that it's built on a great big basically it's built on a great big breadboard. Um, Actually, 10 different slices of breadboard. And what that means is that it's kind of finicky at the moment because when you're running it on oh, that's sorry, one second. That was not what I intended to do at all. I'm trying to get the stream set up here. So the synth is currently built on a bunch of breadboards, 10 different strips now of synthesizer goodness on a breadboard. And let's now actually take a look at what this looks like. So what you can see behind you on the screen here is the schematic of just one part of it, which is the SEM 3340, which is the main oscillator. And that's a chip that was made very famous in the 80s and I guess early to mid 80s. I think was early to mid 80s was where it was particularly popular. But it's now being remade by the actual original company, and I'm also using very similar components, the AS3320, which is the filter that is a remake of the SEM 3320, and a V2164, which is a remake of the SSM 2164 chip. Just very quickly, before we get into the sounds, I want to give you a quick look at a quick visual tour of just the sheer scale of this. So I just have to be careful here because the camera has somehow gotten wired up in the control voltage wires here. So starting from this end, this is the digital end of the house. Everything here that you can see on screen right now is the only digital parts to this. So that red cable is the MIDI in, and that's the MIDI signals being interpreted by the STM32 microcontroller board there, which is running code that I wrote myself to decode the MIDI and then send those MIDI, or basically turn that MIDI into control voltages, which is created by these digital to analog converters that you can see with the two green lights on. The other digital part of this is the Spin Semiconductors FV1 digital signal processor for effects that you can see there on the stand-up board. But then the rest of this gargantuan mass of chips and wires is actually all discrete analog and voltage control componentry, which is mainly centered around this part here, which is right here in these three rows of the breadboard is the primary note voice, which is basically a voltage per octave oscillator using a SEM 3340, a second voice that you can tune independently, and then the third voice here is actually a sub-oscillator using a clock divider, which is fed off the primary note voice. So we get the ability to have a lot of flexibility here of a primary note, a second note to give sort of stereo width and detune sort of fat sound, and then a sub-oscillator to really bring through the bass. And then here we have no less than 4 analog envelope generators using the AS3310 chips, which allows us to generate envelopes to modulate the sound. And all of this is currently feeding out to my Soundcraft mixer. And throughout this demo, let's focus more on this end of the board because that's where all the sort of sound modulation happens between the envelope controllers and the oscillators themselves. You might spy this row here looks decidedly empty. That's because there is one last thing I want to add to this, which is I want to add a noise generator to it as well. And I've got the chips all lined up and ready to go there for that. But we're just not quite 100% ready to go on that one, but we'll get there. So here we go. Let's listen to what this sounds like. So through OBS, I've got this connected into my mixer, and we should be able to hear it right now. Hopefully that's coming through. I'm just looking at the mixer here. Now, being on a breadboard, there's a lot of background noise coming in just due to the sheer fact of all these wires. They're very thin wires for starters, and they've connections through the breadboard are not particularly good, but I did it like this because I wanted to prove out the way in which all these things interact. But now I want to give you just a listen to what it sounds like, and also I'll take you through the features of it, because it's got, for something that started off with a pretty simple concept, it's actually got a lot of different features. So I mentioned first of all that there is 3 different voices, and we can mix each of those in separately. So what I'm going to do is just turn down everything except the primary note voice. And this voice comprises a SEM 3340 oscillator, and then which is feeding into a V2164D quad VCA. And that's mixing together 2 of the waveforms off the oscillator, as well as providing the final note amplitude envelope or amplitude control. And then there's the AS3320, which is the remake of the CEM or SEM 3320 filter chip. So this is it with just a single voice, and we have filter controls on that voice. So and the filter has resonance, of course, as well. But the really interesting thing that happens with this synth, or when it starts getting interesting for me, is if we dial back the filter cutoff there a little bit. There's a second voice, which is essentially the exact same componentry replicated, but with a completely independent oscillator, filter, and amplifier, which means when you turn that up, you hear the sound gets noticeably wider. I'm just going to turn it up a little bit on the mix-up. Now, because these are tuned independently, you can actually access a fine-tune control here, and so that's really closely tuned, and then make them drift a little bit. So you get that sort of flanging sort of effect. You can make them really drift also. Let's bring them back in. Now the 2 voices share the same filter controls. You can hear the effect of them being detuned more with the filter cutoff up. So them drift a lot there, and then come back in. The other neat thing about having these 2 voices is each voice has an independent control for whether the sawtooth wave or the pulse wave, the square wave, is actually heard. So you've kind of actually got 2x2 voices, because so I've just turned these both down, and so that's just one waveform. But then if we mix in the second, oops, sorry, I'm bumping a wire here. And of course, what we also have is, because one of these is a square wave, we do also have pulse width modulation on this, which I can adjust accordingly. Hopefully I've got the right voice turned up. Nope, don't think I do, so let's turn that saw down, and this should be the square coming up. So that's just the two voices now with both their square wave only, and we can pulse with modulate. And there's kind of a nice square wave sounds particularly nice when you really dial up the filter. But dialing in a little bit of saw as well. And this is also where, when you've got both waveforms going, pulse width modulation has a pretty huge effect on the sound. So, plenty of bass oomph in those. The issue, though, with these filters is when you turn up resonance, you lose a bit of the bass. And so to basically compensate for that, there's a third voice you can dial in now, which is actually the sub-oscillator. So you want to bring the bass, we can bring the bass. Now that is a huge sound. Now that is sort of the basics of what each voice can do. So there's pulse width modulation, there's a mix between two waveforms, saw or square, two independent note voices that you can tune separately and detune, and then a sub-oscillator as well. But there's more. So as we saw here in the middle board here, we just swivel the camera around a little bit. This board here is where I've got a whole stack of envelope generators. And these will become basically things that map to the velocity of the note. So the harder you hit the note, the more these envelopes will take effect. And that allows us to affect things like the filter cutoff when we press the note. So take a listen to how the character changes here. So the more I dial up the impact of that envelope, it's creating quite a harsh sort of, there you go, creating sort of a harsh hit to the sound, which the intention here is to adjust this based on the velocity of the note. So when its keys are hit softly, and then when they hit harder, now Now, just for fun, I didn't stop there. I went a little bit nuts with the envelope. So, I mean, you can do this. Sorry, I should also mention there's a standard ADSR envelope on the note itself, so we can turn up the attack for a softer note. But my intention here was to build a bass synth, so I'm all about that hard attack on there. But yeah, so I didn't stop there with the envelopes. So the other thing you can do is also control the resonance as if that's not enough for you, if we turn down, let's turn down the main note voices and just listen to that sub oscillator that's coming through, because we can also establish, oops, I'm using the wrong pot here. 1 second. So if we turn down the, what do we got here? Yeah, no, I was in the right spot. Let's turn down our primary 2 voices and just listen to the sub oscillator, that really deep sort of bassy sound. And again, it has its own independent filter control. So you can have a really sort of growly sub bass, and you can even have the filter right down in your note voices to create sort of this kind of sound. And that's a little bit too harsh on the sub. So you can really make that sub bass go from mild to wild. But anyway, back to what I was wanting to show you, which is, so just the sub bass there, just that real fat bottom end. Again, super filter controls. There's actually a separate envelope for that, which allows you to change how the bass note rings out. So listen to a long press here. Actually got it set so that there's an envelope that actually slowly closes the filter over a long period of time. So you get that sort of organic sense that the note is ringing out, and we can affect that, you know, mildly or not. See, that filter cutoff there is being modulated automatically. And it starts at the offset that we set with the filter control. So if I turn that down, see how it just rings out. And so that's intentional, because I wanted this to have a feeling a little bit more akin to an analog or a physical bass guitar, which sort of has the notes ringing out, not sort of a synthetic sustain that just holds forever. Bringing up our main voices again. So it's got that real feel of being a stringed instrument, which is what I was trying to aim for. Now here's where things start to get fun. So we've covered this end of the synth. We've covered the analog voices here. Sorry for my shoddy camera work. We've covered the envelope generators in here. Now we're going to get into the little bit of heresy here, which is the digital end of the synth. Now, Don't fear, it maintains a completely discrete analog signal path, and the digital effects are entirely optional. You can plug in and get a mix out without any digital effects. But I loved the use of the, I really wanted to use an SV1, FV1 DSP from Spin Semiconductors, because they have their own assembly-based language that you or the user or anyone can program their own digital effects and upload them into the chip and make it do whatever you want it to do. And so just for a simple reverb, now we have a gain control here on the reverb. So let's just get a nice clean long reverb sound. You can hear it gets a little bit distorted on the harder notes, and you can turn the gain right down on the reverb gain to avoid that. But this is where, and I hope folks are still watching, because this is where the synth really starts to get fun. If you turn up the gain, you start to get a little bit of distortion. And I'm just going to turn this down on the mixer a bit, because I can tell it's starting to clip a little bit because we're getting louder here. Okay, so we can dial in the wet and dry on the reverb. So this is completely dry. And then dial up the wet signal. And you can dial it way too high if you want. Of course, it doesn't sound that great. But this is my favorite bit of the synth so far, is that when I was hooking this up, I sort of, by way of a happy accident, happenstance, I ended up creating a feedback path for the reverb, and let's hear what that does. Very subtle control of the dials here. You can start getting some overtones. You can dial it into guitar amp like distortion from being too close to the speaker. You can even distort the complete hell out of it. Adjusting things on the desk here. Make it feedback. Oh, a little bit too hard. You can see you can get all sorts of fun noises out of this. it's very sensitive at the moment. I need to work out how to get these controls to be less prone to going way off into that sort of microphonic feedback, but just subtly. Adjust the gain into the really nice sort of drone fuzz noise that I just let this ring on and on. And the other fun thing you can do when it's sort of sitting here in this crazy territory is go and detune your other voice. Let the feedback just sort of run wild with itself. You can add in a different harmonic. So yeah, there is a ton of things that you can do with this, and I'm kind of surprised by it because I started off very simple idea in mind of I just wanted to make a bass synth that sounded great as soon as you plugged it in. No sound design skills, no freaking around with this, that, the next thing. Just plug it in, sounds great, works immediately. That's the premise here. And so where to next from here? So I'm going to add in that noise voice just so that there's an extra bit of character that you can add into the sound. And then that's it. We're done for the prototype of this. At the moment, it consists of two CEM 3340s, 1, 2, 3, soon to be 4 AS 3320 filter chips. It'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 quad VCAs when it's done. And then the bunch of op amps, of course, and the microcontroller for the MIDI thing and MIDI conversion. But one final note before I leave you with this: obviously, that's a huge amount of components to use, especially in a synth like this. So for example, using 6 quad VCAs, right? That is crazy. That's literally 24 voltage controlled amplifiers throughout this for a 3-voice synth. But there's method in the madness of why I've done this and why I've also kept things like separate filter controls for the different voices, again, using voltage-controlled filters and separate voltage-controlled oscillators and separate voltage-controlled attack, decay, sustain, release, is because the idea here is to build a synth that can be both a desktop semi-modular unit with a whole lot of patching points presented, which will all be normalized. So again, you can plug it in and you can use it, and it'll sound, just like we just heard it as a synth that's immediately usable. Notice the second voice there was way differently tuned. So you'll be able to plug it in and use it, but then I want users to be able to patch in their own voltage control signal for the mix between the waveforms in one of the oscillators, or the amount of feedback going through the effects unit, or maybe a voltage control, whether the first or second voice or the sub voice is mixed in. You could have these LFOs set up that were mixing in those voices in and out to create an incredible stereo effect if you wanted. All that sort of stuff. And so there'll be literally a ton of, 24 different patch points just for the VCAs. There'll be, another 6 for the filter controls, or 12, because there'll be 6 for the cutoff and 6 for the resonance. There'll be 2 volt per octave, as well as 2 or a single pulse width modulation. Lots and lots and lots of controls that will all be exposed via control voltage jacks, both on the standalone desktop version of this and the Eurorack version. And I'm going to make sure that if patching and if patching and semi-modular is not your thing, this will still work for you as a MIDI synth. So all of those controls that I just mentioned will also be controllable via MIDI control channels. And so, I'll do the basics, like obviously a note will fire a note, velocity will control the amount of that envelope control to give that sort of initial hit on the filter cutoff and the resonance. But then you'll also be able to use things like the mod wheel and the pitch bend. So the pitch bend will control either both the oscillators pitch bending or just one. So that'd be how you can get that nice sort of almost theremin sound of the second voice detuning around. And then the mod wheel will probably go directly to the filter cutoff for most of the primary voices. But then all of the other control points here, all of the other amplifier control points, or all the other voltage control points in here for the amplifiers, for the filters, for the oscillators, for the envelopes, all of those will also be mapped to MIDI control signals. So I'm trying to keep the front panel of this relatively simple, because again, the idea here is to create an instrument that is opinionated in how you use it. It's not a clean palette like I've got Virus TI2 here in a peak that you can do anything with, but you can also, it's intimidating to start off with because it can do everything. So because it can do everything, you've got to wade through everything to find what you're looking for. I wanted to create instruments that were more opinionated in their use, that when you plug them in, they had a fixed number of controls, that no matter how you turned those controls, it always produced something, and hopefully it produced something good. So, not like, I hate when you hit an init button on a beautiful synth and it just sounds like crap, right? Yeah, it's a blank canvas and a starting point, but I wanted something, or I'm going to build something that is always sounds great and won't sort of lead you astray. So opinionated by nature. I think that's it for now. So I'll come back and do another update, probably just via Twitch when I'm working on the noise thing. So I'll put the link on the video here to the Twitch stream that you can follow, just to get sort of daily updates on how this is going. Once the noise module is in here, the noise voice, then the prototype is done, and I got to update this schematic here to include the whole thing. Again, this is just like one voice, so that's a big. It's going to be a big schematic. But then, once that's done, we'll get a PCB fabricated and a few prototypes, and we'll convert that breadboard mess into a actual soldered PCB. And that'll be exciting, because as soon as I've got the PCB ordered, I can start tearing down. Well, as soon as I get the PCB delivered, I'll start tearing that down, and that'll free up some components to work on the next thing. I think between the noise generator and that very deep synth sort of bass sounds and the all the envelopes that I've got there, I think I've got the makings of an interesting drum machine as well, a completely analog drum machine. That's going to be a lot of fun to build. All right, everyone, thank you very much for watching, and again, stay tuned to the Twitch stream for daily updates. See you later. I'm James. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.